Salve omnes. Hodie discamus the imperfect of sum and possum. And so recently we reviewed the imperfect and the perfect of first, second, third, and fourth conjugation verbs. And we had a little quiz. But there are a few verbs that don't kind of follow to the same degree that typical bombas endings. And so I wanted to spend a moment talking about the two of them because they're interrelated. And those are sum and possum. And I bet when we look at some of these forms, you're like, oh, this looks familiar. But sometimes it's just a little tricky to remember in your head what the form looks like, even if you can recognize it and translate it correctly in a story. So that's what we're just going to try and practice right now by reviewing how to form these ourselves, because we want to be able to use them as well as recognize them. Okay, all right, let's take a quick look at some exempla. So, puer eram nunc vir sum. What do you think this means? Puer eram nunc vir sum. Along the same lines. Puellae eramus nunc feminae sumus. Felix erat, laetus erat, nunc tristis est. All right. Over here. Dolorem sentire poteram, nunc non possum. I guess that actually would be a good thing. Solem videre poteras, nunc nubes est. Sol est post nubem, non possum videre solem. Muli Troianos defendere poterant. Great. So let's start over here. I was a boy. Now I am a man. You want to try that one now that you've heard that one? We were girls. Now we are women. Felix erat. He was happy. Now he is tristis. Sad. Poter. Maybe if we know what non possum means, we can guess what poteram will be. Right now, I am not able, but I was able to feel pain. Poteras, you were able to see the sun. Nunc, now there is a cloud. And muri, walls, were able to defend the Trojans. Just some quick sentences. And that gives us maybe using these forms as a spark your memory. Can you remember how we decline sum and possum in the present tense, right? How do I say I am, you are, he, she, it is in Latin? So why don't you take a second to try and do that on your own in your notebook or in response if this is an ed puzzle. All right, and so we have the answers right here. Now, what similarities can you draw between the forms of possum and the forms of sum over here? Do you see any overlap between these two boxes? You remember that the forms of sum are attached to the form to different stems of POS or POT in order to form possum. I am able, I am, right? And similarly to in English, right? I say I am able, and I am is almost part of that form, right? I'm able to do something. We use possum all the time, both in Latin and in English. It's really common to say that you can or you are able to do something. Great. So now with the imperfect, you saw a couple of forms up here. And we're going to look at the imperfect, boom. And so we have the imperfect here. How do these endings maybe in some way remind us of what the imperfect endings are for most verbs? Hopefully, maybe you identified that, yeah, aram, aras, arat is just bombas, bot. We've just replaced the B with an ER. And it's not an ending, it's the full word. So if I want to say I was, I just say er plus os, ot, amos, otis, ant, to get different imperfect endings. Now, where do we see this form represented in the imperfect of possum? Hopefully you pointed out, well, it's just like in the other situation. We have the form of possum and it's all attached to a stem. And a little pro tip here is that both in the present and in the imperfect, when the form of sum begins with an S, we use POS as the stem. And when the stem begins with an E, when the form of sum begins with an E, we use POT as the stem. So that's, if you notice, all the forms of the imperfect of sum begin with an E. There's no sum S, right? There's no changing of that first letter. It's always ER, ER, ER. So we just use only that POT stem for possum. And so I get, I was able, you were able, he, she, it was able. Okay, so now that we've retrieved the forms of sum and possum, let's just take a quick discussion of what is the perfect tense. We've seen the imperfect. What is the perfect of sum and possum going to look like? And so why don't you take a guess now? Spend a little bit of time thinking about what you could imagine it possibly be. And now, what if I gave you these principal parts? Now, do you think you could guess what the perfect tense of sum and possum might be, given the principal parts? Hopefully, you pointed out or identified that the key thing would be this third principal part. The great thing about the perfect of sum and possum is they're not irregular. It's totally regular. You just have to, their third principal part can be a little wacky, particularly the third principal part of sum, right? Fooey, we might not look at it and think sum. So we want to have that in our head. But otherwise, it's the same endings, right? We go to the third principal part and we attach e, isti, imus, istis, erung. So it's the same endings as a recollection there. And the fact of the matter is we just don't see these forms quite as often, because if we think idea of being or being able to, it's rare that that's a one-off event, right? It's rare that that is not habitual. By essence, to be something or to be able to do something is normally an ongoing action. So in English and in Latin, it's much more common to see the imperfect. Now you might see the perfect, and when you see it, it's normally meant to say like he has been X. And so you don't really see it a ton, or like I've been happier, right? I have been happier than I am right now. And this is this particular type of perfect, which is like in relation to the present. Same way I've been able to see my friends or to eat breakfast. I've been able to eat breakfast this morning, you might say, right? Like at this point in time, I've been able to eat. So, but again, right, you do see these less common, but it's just good. You will see them. So it's good just to be aware. Okay. All right. So the last thing I really wanted to squeeze into this video is knowing when in Latin we use the form of to be and when we don't, right? When we are using the form to be in English, but we don't use it in Latin. And the main thing to keep in mind there is ask yourself when you see a sentence, is there another verb in it? If there is another verb besides is or was, then that is, it's going to be a form of that verb. You don't need a form of sum. Right, it's just going to be an ending, right? So he is running. What is the main verb there? Is it is or is it run, right? Running is another verb. So I know, okay, this isn't actually, I don't need a form of sum. I just need the right tense of the verb to run. So I need the present. This is happening in the present. And I need a T ending for the he. And that's how I say he is running. He is a man. Is there another verb besides is? No, right? Man is a noun. So now I know this is the main event. So I do need a form of is, and I'd say est weird. Okay. This is the passive voice. This is something we haven't talked about, so I'm not going to dive into it here. But even if it was passive, right, we look and we'd say, okay, are is not the main course. Destroy is also a verb. So what I actually just need here is a form of the verb deleo, delere with the appropriate ending on. We haven't talked about these endings yet. We will later this year. But just so you know, right, even if you see this, right, there's two verbs. That probably means we're not using a form of sum. Okay. In the same vein, if I said he was a god versus he was fleeing, right? This is going to be the difference between saying erat Deus and fugiebat. Okay, so keeping that in mind, oh, I already wrote them out all here. Keep this in mind as you now try and practice this in a little forms exercise. All right, hope this was helpful, and we'll talk about it more next class.